In LO3, we're going to investigate 3 patterns of evolution. These are divergent evolution, convergent evolution, and coevolution. Before we begin, we need to make sure that you understand what a species is in terms of biology. This is a really hard definition to pin down, but this is the one that I'm going to be using as we look at evolution. A species, a group of organisms that can successfully reproduce among themselves. That means they reproduce, their offspring is viable, or they can continue to live and reproduce themselves. Divergent evolution occurs when 2 or more related species over time become dissimilar. You can see in the picture to the right that there was a common ancestor that became different and different and different over time, that eventually split into 2 lineages of the woolly mammoth, which is now extinct, and the modern elephant. So there is a common ancestor that underwent divergent evolution. Divergent evolution causes what's known as speciation. Speciation is simply the making of a new species. Again, a species is a group of organisms that can successfully reproduce. So even though these are all fruit flies, Drosophila melanogaster cannot mate successfully with Drosophila obscura based on our definition of what a species is. Here's an example, because this is kind of hard to understand without an example. We have a bunch of wild fruit flies on this rotting banana on an island. They're laying their eggs, they're reproducing happily. A hurricane strikes, and some of the bananas get washed away to the island over here, so we have 2 separate islands. And so you have fruit flies now on both islands. The environment is slightly different on each island, so favorable adaptations, because each island is different, keep getting passed along, and it makes these fruit flies different from each other over time. So not just 2 fruit flies, but many, many fruit flies over many, many years. So these 2 populations are becoming more and more different, more and more suited to their environment, and then one day they're reunited together. They became so different on their respective islands that even though they had a common ancestor, they can no longer mate with each other because they're too different. We now have 2 different species. That's the idea of speciation. How we can make new species form? 2 main ways. First, we can geographically isolate them. We can put a physical barrier that forces the population to break into 2. So let's say here a river forms, and these 2 bugs are now stuck on opposite sides of the river. It's a really wide river, so they can't cross it. Over many, many generations, there are traits you can see here that there's some sort of mutation that this green bug ended up appearing. It must have been favorable because this population is now all green. Okay, there's no green here, but you can see that there are 2 different species. If you put them back together, they cannot mate. They were geographically isolated. We can also reproductively isolate organisms, and if reproductive isolation happens, then they're not going to be able to reproduce, and they become their own species. Some organisms breed at different times, so if you have a species of birds, that all of a sudden something happens where one of them breeds in the spring and then another breeds in the fall, over time that can get passed on, and now you end up with 2 species that had a common ancestor. Maybe they breed at the same time, but their parts aren't compatible. That would be a way to cause speciation. Different mating calls. Most organisms, actually all of them that I know of that have mating calls, don't recognize the mating call of another species. They hear it, but they don't realize that it's a mating call, so they won't be attracted to that other species. If they do get to the point where they mate, maybe the sperm and egg physically cannot fuse with each other, so there's mechanical differences there. Or the sperm and egg do fuse, the fetus develops, but something genetically doesn't allow it to keep forming, and so it dies. All of these things are ways to reproductively isolate a species from another one. And remember, in order to be a species, one group of organisms, they have to be able to successfully reproduce. Those are all forms of divergent evolution, becoming different. Convergent evolution, we're looking at 2 organisms that are unrelated that become more similar in appearance because of the environment that they live in. So at first glance, you might believe that they're related. You have sharks an ancient ichthyosaur, and dolphins. If you were a kid and you didn't know any better, you might say, oh, they're all related, they all look like fish. Well, because they all live in the ocean in similar environments, they've evolved to look similar. They have a streamlined body shape, they have the dorsal fins, the pectoral fins. However, a shark is a fish, the ichthyosaur is a reptile, and the dolphin's a mammal. No common ancestor, not related at all, yet they look alike. Convergent evolution. The third pattern of evolution is called co-evolution. And if you're on a sports team and you're a co-captain, you share the role, you work together. In terms of coevolution, when one species evolves, another species that might be dependent on it will evolve as well. You can see here, this is a flower, and this bug's proboscis is the perfect shape to fit into that flower. You can assume that if the flower shape started to change over time, so would the nose, it's not really a nose, but think of it that way, the nose shape of this fly. They would evolve in response to each other because they depend on each other to survive. The fly helps pollinate it. Same thing with bees and flowers. When one evolves, the other will evolve in response. When we're studying how evolution occurs, we plot the information on what's called a cladogram, or a phylogenetic tree, like you see off to the right. Each branch shows that there is a common ancestor that underwent speciation, and each branch from there is a new species. You have these pictures, so just follow along in your notes. It's a lot like reading a family tree. The root of the tree down here is the oldest ancestor. The tips of the branches are the descendants of the ancestor. So down here is the oldest point of the tree, and then more recent is up at the top. When a lineage splits, it's a speciation event. It's a branch on the phylogeny on that tree. When a speciation event occurs, a single ancestral lineage gives rise to two or more daughter lineages. Phylogenies trace patterns of shared ancestry between lineages. Each lineage has a part of its history that is unique to it alone, and parts that are shared with other lineages. So in my picture, yours isn't in color. Organism B here, species B, has its own unique history that makes it different from C. However, both B and C share the ancestry in this dotted line. They all have the same features until something occurs that drives each population to become its own species. Similarly, each lineage has ancestors that are unique to that lineage and ancestors that are shared with other lineages. So this ancestor that drives this line of C is unique to C only, not related to B. This event right here where it diverged is where B and C have a relationship that is common. This ancestor right here is common to both A, B, and C because that's where that branch diverges. Now, to that misconception about the idea that humans evolved from monkeys. Not true. Humans did not evolve from chimpanzees or any other monkeys. Okay? We share a common ancestor that over time gave rise to the lineages that we see today. Now up to this point, we've seen cladograms that are shaped as such. We can also plot these linearly. Same thing, just looking at it a little bit different, a little bit flatter. Things you need to know, and you'll have to do this on your worksheet. Everything that you see above the tick mark, all of the organisms have that feature, so make sure you write that down. Everything above the little tick mark is shared by all the organisms above it. For example, vertebrae having a spinal cord. All perch, flounders, lungfish, lizards, birds, and mammals have vertebrae. Amniotic eggs. Lizards, birds, and mammals have amniotic eggs, but lungfish, flounders, perch, spiders, lobsters do not. The species that has nothing in common with the others is called, make sure you write this down, an outgroup. O-U-T-G-R-O-U-P, just like it sounds. An outgroup has nothing in common and is just used to show relationships. In this phylogenetic tree, we actually have two outgroups. We have lobsters and spiders. They don't share any features with all of the organisms here above the vertebrae line. You're going to do something similar on your worksheet, so make sure you grab your worksheet from your crate, see me if you have any questions, and as always, refer to your note packet to see what's coming up afterwards.